Welcome, everyone, to episode number 9 of the Country Club Leaders Podcast. Today, we're honored to have Dr. Trey Rogers as our guest. Dr. Rogers is a professor of turfgrass management in the Department of Plant, Soil, Microbial Sciences at the Michigan State University. Welcome, Dr. Trey.
Thank you, Leo.
It's great to have you.
Nice to be here.
So, like I was telling about you, like I was saying before I hit the record button, I enjoy hearing stories, and I'm assuming all of our guests that listen in enjoy hearing stories. So, if you could go back to when you were a young boy, and I don't know what came first, golf or agronomy, but if you could start us off and let us know what it was like back in Arkansas.
Okay, well, that goes back a few years, obviously. Now, I was about 11 when my dad brought home a set of golf clubs and said that he had started playing golf and wanted to know if I wanted to try it. And so we went out, and I quickly enjoyed it quite a bit, played quite a bit of golf with friends and neighbors at local courses. Then my dad joined the local country club at Hartscrabble in Fort Smith, Arkansas, and so I got a job working there in the pro shop, cleaning clubs, changing the range, you know, the drill.
Before you go any further, Trey, how did they come up with the name Hardscrabble?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, it's a piece of land that's up on top of a mountain, and they were trying to grow stuff there. And they say an old Scotsman said, "You might be able to grow it there, but it'll be a hard scrabble." And that's what they say. But I don't know. It's a Perry Maxwell course, and so he did that in Southern Hills and Prairie Dunes all the way down through there and everything. So it's got a lot of history, but I got the one there, and then I was about 18, and the superintendent walked by, and I knew he was needing some help, and he suggested that I come out there, and if I wanted to really see what it was like out there, because I was still playing golf in high school and all that. I wasn't that good, but then I got out there, and I really liked it. Now, I was already going to school at the University of Arkansas, enrolled there for engineering. That's what my dad was, a civil engineer. So I was pretty sure I was going to be a civil engineer. And the first couple of years, I was in civil engineering, but during the summers, I'd come back and work at the golf course. And of course, I kept liking the golf course more and more. And finally, about mid my junior year, I finally told my mom, I said, "I can't do this. I don't want to be an engineer." "What do you want to do?" "I want to be an agronomist. I want to be a golf course superintendent." And she says, "Well, then do it." I said, "What do you think Dad will think?" She said, "Just do it, then tell it." And so I changed my major, and then I told him, and I'll never forget this because he says, "What's an agronomist?" And I said, "Someone who studies crop and soil sciences, and in my case, it'll be turf grass." "What do you want to do?" "I want to be a golf course superintendent." He said, "Like Sonny Faust." Now, Sonny Faust was the superintendent at Hartscrabble at the time, and had actually been the superintendent at the '77 US Open at Southern Hills. So I had a pretty good mentor, and I said, "Yeah,
Right.
Just like Sonny, except I'm going to get an education," because he doesn't have one, and we're getting into an age where you had to have one about that time. This is 1981 or so. So I waited for his response, and he said, "You really like it, don't you?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Then you need to go for it," because he says, "I'm not so sure I like being an engineer, but I got to support you guys, and that's what I do." Now, I don't know if he was lying or not. Really doesn't matter, because what he did was just free me up, right?
Right.
He freed me up, and away I went. And
Right.
graduated from there, got a job back at Hardscrabble as the assistant. And at that time, Leo, you didn't have to be if you had an education and you were worth anything, you could be a superintendent within, 4 or 5 months. It wasn't like it is now, right? Because
Right.
they're just entering a new era and everything. And so I'm starting to interview for superintendent's jobs because people know I'm out there. And the professor at the University of Arkansas named John King, he bugged me a couple of times over the winter. He said, I'd really like you to consider going to graduate school. And I kind of blew him off because I kind of knew what I wanted to do. And he asked me a third time, and I said, Dr. King, I'll tell you what, I will consider going to graduate school. I will consider your offer. I'm very flattered and all that. I'm not positive what it is. But I said, what I need to know is, why do you keep bothering me? Why is this important to you? And he said, well, I'm going to tell you something. He said, there's a test that I give every year. And I've asked the same question for 15 years. And he said, you're the only person that's ever been able to answer the question correctly. And it was all about details in a research paper. And I saw immediately what was going on. And he said, I really think you'd have a mind to do this if this is what you wanted to do. So I said, okay, well, I'll come up there. Somebody's encouraging me again, right? Somebody's
Right.
encouraging me again. So I go up there and I don't know a damn thing about graduate school, not one thing, nothing. I know how to kind of do what I do on a golf course. So I quickly and slowly and painfully at times learn what's going on in the research world. But I got to teach a soils lab, and it was mainly from a mistake that had been made by the university, and they needed me to teach that lab in order to get paid. And I loved it. And I love the teaching. So now I love the teaching and I love the research. I like the lifestyle. Somebody says, well, you got to get a PhD. You can't get one at the University of Arkansas because we don't like people to get their degrees all at one spot. So I tried to go to North Carolina State and they didn't have any work. And then by the grace of God, I will tell you, Penn State University had an assistantship. And I went up there and I felt like I went to the Mecca, Leo. I mean, Penn State at that time was rocking and rolling, not that it isn't now, but at that time, had a bunch of senior faculty members who took me under their wing, hit them at a perfect time. I absorbed from those guys. Watchke, Waddington, who was my advisor, Joe Deutsch, who was the legend, Jack Harper. These guys, they knew what I wanted and they could see how eager I was. And so I graduate from there. And it's 1988. There's not a lot of jobs around, but there's one job at Michigan State. And I apply for it and get the job. And to this day, I mean, it was the only job I applied for. It's the only job that's ever been offered to me.
Wow.
And I took it. And my dad said, how long are you going to be there? And I said, 1 or 2 years, probably. And here we are. I'll be starting year 36 in about a month.
Wow.
It's an interesting, I don't know if it's an interesting story, but it kind of 1988 to now, it's all been one spot, Leo.
That's pretty good. It's really, you know what? It sounded like you had a lot of people in your corner the whole way too, which was pretty cool.
Always have. Yeah. I've always had a lot of people in my corner. That's been what's really made me, I don't want to use the word effective or good, but I care about my students because people cared about me. And I know that if you encourage them just a little bit in the right direction, you'll get what they want. Because, they come to school here unlike anybody else at the universities, any universities. Why? Because they've worked on a golf course and they know what they want. And they've been encouraged a little bit by their superintendent. My job is just to continue encouraging them, just patting them on the patting them on the fanny and say, you're in, let's go this direction, and continue to encourage them. And the great thing is I've been in their shoes, right? I've changed majors. I haven't known what I wanted to do. I found the golf course. I am excited to go to work every day, just like they were. So I get it. I was a turf guy that became an academician. And that's what I always tell people, as opposed to an academician who got into turf. I came from that side, so I get it. And there's a lot of other professors out there that are the same as me. And I think that's really an advantage.
Interesting, very interesting. So were you ever offered any other job besides the Michigan State job?
Well, I only interviewed for this one. I didn't even interview for
Right.
anything else. I had a couple in the hopper, but as soon as they offered this job, I was like bird in the hands worth two in the bush. If you remember 1988, it was pretty dire, and there weren't a lot of good things going on. And so I felt lucky to even have a job.
Right, right. So can you tell us a little bit about your experience with the World Cup? That had to be pretty exciting.
Well, that was early on. I was still a young guy. I mean, 31 years old, and the World Cup had been identified. The United States is where they were going to have the '94 World Cup. So what happens is, unbeknownst to me at the time, FIFA and the World Cup, they hired the late and great Dr. Jim Beard to see if it's possible to grow grass indoors, because FIFA was trying to explore this idea of dome stadiums and grass and dome stadiums. And they thought, what better place to do it than the United States, which at the time had the majority of the dome stadiums. They may still, but I don't know. But at the time, the three dome stadiums were the Pontiac Silverdome, New Orleans Superdome, and the Houston Astrodome. Now, you might think there's more, but at the time, that's the only three.
Right.
So those three get together and they put some money and asked Beard to do a study. And Beard finished the study in late of 1991, turned it out. And the reason that I was looking at this study, I was looking over the shoulder of my professor emeritus now, Paul Ricci, and Joe Vargas. We were coming back from a meeting. I remember where we were, Chicago Airport. I'm just a young kid. I said, what are you guys looking at? They said, well, we're looking at a report from Beard, who's trying to study about how to grow grass indoors. I said, what for? They said, the World Cup's coming to the United States, 1994. I said, I know I said this. What's the World Cup? Because I was no soccer guy, not even in the least. Right? Not even in the least. And even though I had studied athletic fields in the United States, for me it was all football, and so anyway, one thing leads to another. Pontiac Silverdome knows that if they're going to get a bid, it's going to be one of those three stadiums going to get a bid, but the Silverdome knows if they're going to get a bid, they're going to have Michigan State help them. And so when they said, do you want to go to a meeting? I don't think I hesitated more than a microsecond before I said, yes, I'm in. I'm in all the way, because, I had been thinking about this same thing about how would you ever put grass indoors, but I wasn't thinking about it for soccer. I was thinking about it for football. So anyway, one thing leads to another, and we work with the Pontiac Silverdome and the World Cup, or the Michigan Bid Committee. We get a bid, and then we go about trying to figure out how we're going to put grass inside. And it's a long story, probably pretty boring, but at the same time, the crux of the whole thing was we figured out what everybody else knows. And, all you got to do is look at Phoenix and Las Vegas now, the fact that they roll in a field in and out. And the idea of a dome stadium has meant that they want to use it for a lot of stuff. And so we'd be down there studying at the Pontiac Silverdome. We'd have grass plots out there, boxes, have lights, doing traffic. They'd come up to us and say, you got to tear all this stuff down. We got a Guns N' Roses concert Saturday afternoon. So we'd raise our hands and, we're supposed to be trying to, produce this field for FIFA, and we're rolling along May 92. We think we got a lot of time. Then all of a sudden I have to go into a meeting with FIFA, and I'm frustrated that we're having to tear this stuff down all the time. It's like, well, we need a place to study this at our own university. The guy says, yeah, but that'll cost a lot of money to build a dome like that. I'm talking among my colleagues. I said, yeah, but we need a break. So we walk in to this meeting, and the meeting's with FIFA and the Silverdome people, and I can tell it's pretty serious. Nobody's smiling. And they said, how's the project going? I said, well, it's okay. I mean, to tell you the truth, we get started and we have to stop every once in a while. So that's frustrated. But have you got some ideas? I said, yeah, we got some ideas. They said, well, FIFA's kind of nervous about this whole thing. I thought, well, that's a sign of intelligence because, nobody's done anything like this. So yeah, that's a good idea. They said, yeah, but what they really want to know is can we speed it up and do a test run? And by now I'd learned what a friendly was. So I knew that was a practice game before the World Cup. And I said, well, you could probably do a practice game in March of 94 before the thing. They said, no, we're wondering if you could move it up to 93. I said, well, maybe December of 93, because the Lions won't make the playoffs and we could probably get in there for that. They said, no, no, we're thinking June of 93. I said, 11 months from now. They said, yeah. I said, well, who's the game? And they said, it's the final of the Gold Cup, England and Germany. Now, I'd learned a lot of soccer in this time. I said, well, Germans are the reigning world champs. They said, yeah. And the English think they invented the game. Yeah, that'll be a good test, they said. So I'm looking at them and I got about 5 seconds to think about it. I said, we can pull this off, but we need one thing. They said, what's that? I said, we need you to build us a research dome on the campus. And so, it just happened that 2 hours prior to that, I'd been telling everybody this is what we need. All of a sudden it presents itself, the opportunity. I said, can you build that dome? They said, we can build it. I said, we got to build it fast. They said, you just tell us how much it costs and we'll build it. So we built this big 6,000 square foot simulator air supported structure. And in there, we're really able to figure out pretty quick about how to grow grass in the shade. And Leo, there are people that grow grass in the shade now on golf courses that use these same techniques that we put out and published. And so this was the precursor to all this of how people kind of manage grass in the shade. Now, so anyway, fast forward, we put together what's called a portable field out of modules. We built it in the parking lot of the Pontiac Silverdome. We moved that modular field in for those test games in 93, simulate exactly what we're doing, turn around and do the same thing in 94. I would consider us very successful in this. Interestingly enough, I ended up talking a lot about this for a few years afterwards because people wanted to hear about it. Then it died off. And now that the World Cup's coming back in 2026, and we're going to have another big role in this, even bigger than we had in the first time, I find myself talking a lot about it now again. And so it's reminding me, and I'm remembering a lot of things about it that I hadn't even thought about in 20 years. So it's quite exciting.
So how many sections of turf, what were there to roll into the Silverdome?
Well, big roll sod did not exist at the time. So what you have to imagine is a big hexagon shaped, almost like a flower pot that's 8 foot in diameter, 8 foot across, and 6-sided. it's picked up with forklifts, 6 inches worth of soil. And each one of these modules weighed about 3,300 pounds. And took 2,000 of them to
Wow.
fit the Pontiac Silverdome. It took about a week to move it in. Remember, in this time, big roll sod does not exist. And we have to be really innovative. We're going to use some of the techniques for this 26 World Cup that we discovered or used in the 94 World Cup. So even though there's quite a bit of, quite a few years and a lot of technology in 32 years, some things have stayed the same.
So you had to put those together like a jigsaw puzzle?
I would call it exactly like a jigsaw puzzle. They fit together,
Wow.
just like it slides in. And the interesting thing is these modules were built by the automobile industry. So they had tolerance. They were built out of steel. Well, every module we built after and used after that was built out of molded plastic. But these were built out of steel. They were like prototypes. 2,000 of them that came right out of the automobile industry, just like you were building a Corvette or a Mustang or something. So they had some really high tolerances. So they fit together just so really nicely.
Wow. And then I see here you were involved with the Olympics too.
Well, that's just kind of a continuation with these portable turf projects. And remember that for about a 10 or 12 year period, this portable turf was kind of the answer. You'd put it in modules, you'd grow it somewhere else, you'd pick it up, and you'd move it in. Now, what's replaced that, Leo, is big roll sod. But big roll sod and sod grown on plastic have replaced the module. But at the time, that wasn't around. So the module kind of was the big dog on campus, so to speak. Now, in both those Olympics, both 2004 in Greece, 2008 in Beijing, those were fields that were a result of portable field that was a result of the opening ceremonies at these two Olympics. Because whether it was in Athens, Greece, or Beijing, China, the opening ceremonies was being driven by a group that wanted to use aquatics. And so they filled up the bowls of the stadium with water. Of course, it would have killed the grass. And so what we were hired to do was to develop these modular fields in those two countries, utilizing, of course, the resources of those countries, and then pick the field up, put it in, be ready for the track and field events, and eventually it would play also the gold medal soccer game.
So you work in Argentina, Brazil, and Australia. Was that the fields also, the modular fields?
Yeah, I would tell you through some sort of sports fields. I would call myself, even though I've been at Michigan State for 36 years, I would tell people I've had to reinvent myself 2 or 3 times. And the primary reason was because I didn't want to get stale, didn't want to get bored. One time I got mad and I changed myself. A couple of times I did some small diversions because of where my children were in their ages. Like I tell people, in the 90s, I studied grass all over the world. In the 2000s, I studied it in my backyard. When I say that, my community, East Lansing, where I live, because those were the high schools that my kids were playing on. And so I'm looking at those high schools and I'm saying, we can fix this. This is not as hard as people think. And so I had a couple of graduate students and we did some projects that really made some contributions in that area. And then about 2010 or 11, somewhere in there, I had a watershed moment. I was down at the horse races in Louisville. I was going there for the Breeders' Cup. And at that time, by the time you get to about 2010, the artificial turf being backfilled with the crumb rubber is really starting to become pretty popular with some of these, some of these colleges and high schools even. And so I'm sitting there in the breakfast nook at one of these hotels, and the women's Providence soccer team, Providence College soccer team sitting there. And I had a daughter who also played college softball. So I kind of knew the language and what the lingo and what to say. And I asked one of them if they were playing, who they're playing today while they're playing Louisville. I go, were you going to play on a natural or an artificial turf? And they said, well, I think we're going to play on artificial. And she said, but I'd rather play on natural turf, except maybe for bad natural turf. And I said, I agree with that. And about that time, this athletic director walks over and he introduces himself. And he says, you can't have natural grass fields in the Northeast. And I said, really? He said, yeah, Providence, Rhode Island, we can't have it. We just don't have the weather for it. I said, well, I don't know. I said, I think if you get the management right and you make a commitment. He said, well, you don't know what you're talking about. I said, well, there's many, many areas where you would be 100% correct, but this is not one of them. This actually is one where I do know what I'm talking about. And we talked for a little while, and I wasn't convincing him, and he wasn't convincing me. And finally, I said, they do a pretty good job in the Northeast at this one school called Penn State. I said, they got all natural turf fields. And I said, things are pretty good. And he looks me square in the eye and he said, son, that's not the Northeast, that's the West. And I just stared at him for a minute. And I said to myself and to my wife later on, I'm done with athletic fields for a while. She said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to golf. Why? I said, I'm looking at this crystal ball. These boys are about to have to do some really, really significant changes in the way they grow grass, because what they're doing right now is not sustainable. Well, of course, we've all know in the last 10 years, we've had renovations of golf courses to levels that nobody even believes. But I could see that. So that's why, between 2011, 12, and up to really only just in the last year or two, all my research involved around golf and renovations and trying to help superintendents not be afraid to do a renovation. Because the big thing with superintendents when it comes to renovations, they know how to grow grass. They know how to maintain a golf course. They know how to present one to you. What they don't know is how to establish grass necessarily on a wholesale basis, because that's not what they do for you. And that scares them a lot. And I knew that. Well, there's a bunch of holes that we could fill in. And back to that quick story in Louisville, because, people say, well, what does that have to do with anything? And I said, well, here's the deal. I've always been a lot more successful in talking to a superintendent or somebody or a member of a golf course. Why? Because a member of a golf course, when they make a decision based on their golf course, guess what they're going to have to do? They're going to have to defend it, and they're going to have to play on it. And they're going to have to defend it with all their buddies. The green chair's got to defend everything they do. But that administrator that makes all those decisions in that college athletics, they're never going to play 1 minute on that field.
Right.
So I said, I'm going to have a lot more fun talking to the golfer, because I can get inside their head and make them understand the direction. So for the last 10 years, up until, in the last year or so, I've been really exclusively just, helping out on golf courses, primarily reconstructions. And that's, and I met you during that time as well. So.
It's got to, like you said, it's got to be scary for a superintendent to see his golf course basically dirt. Okay, grow grass again,
Right.
It's got to be scary for those guys and
those
ladies.
Because that's not what that's not their forte. They
Right.
don't build golf courses for a living, they maintain them. And so I figured out very quickly, if I can help them get over that hump through either things that they can read or being available to them to talk to them, walk them through these things, we'll get further. But I also knew that the more important thing was to do the research and publish it so that others could grab it, because you can't be every place at once, nor do you want to be. And you want to leave behind bodies of knowledge so that you can push forward as things evolve.
So can you describe one or two or three of your big success stories? Some club or course was having nightmares and you came in and try this and it turned the place around.
Well, I don't know too much about that. It's usually been, for me, it's been when they've wanted to when they wanted to rebuild the golf course and renovate, and what in 2014 we had an ice storm come through Detroit, and it killed just about every green in the city that was annual bluegrass. It was devastating. I've never smelled anything quite like it, and I hope I never do again. You'd walk out and just smell death. And it was all because a freak year where all these greens were under ice for about 90 days. Now, as we figured out, there were two things contributing to that we needed to change. One was a top dressing practice that was kind of building sand dams, because when we dragged the sand into the green, we'd make the little humps so that the water wouldn't drain off the front of the green. You had that's what's called a sand dam. And the other thing was the trees. There were just way too many trees around these greens. And this contributed greatly. Well, the clubs, they want to play golf, and the only way to really do it is to, regrow grass, but there's not a whole lot of sod around, because at that time you couldn't buy bent grass sod. It didn't really exist. And there'd been enough death all the way through the Midwest. If there was any sod at all, it had already been bought. So now you kind of got to do everything from seed, which is a little bit slower. But there were a couple of clubs during that 2014, and I can remember running myself damn near ragged. One was called Lockmore Club, and we reseeded in May and opened up again in August. So that's pretty good. And that's in Detroit. And the other one was, because most of the time, if you think about it, Leo, you just imagine at Lawrence reseeding in May and opening in August. That's no good, right? Why? Because that's when those people want to play.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that, it's not like Florida where you can during the summertime when they're all gone.
Right.
So
right.
Most of the time with renovations, you do them in the spring or in the fall when they're on the shoulder seasons. But this particular one did it in the middle of the summer. And we learned a lot there. We learned a lot. We learned just how long you could actually take it, how much you could push the grass. It wasn't anything that we'd actually done before. So great learning experience. It was pretty good. But what also had to happen, and I've never had to do it again since, I had to cut down trees in front of a lot of people. And I would never advise that. That's
what I was just going to talk about.
That is a bad move, right? Because when you start cutting down trees and they can watch you cut them down, you are the butcher. And even though the tree's got to come down, we're not going to be able to grow this grass with this tree. It's just not happening. And all the science points that it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if you're the wizard from Wall Street. It isn't going to happen. But if you have to cut a tree down in front of a group of people that are in the neighborhood or whatever else, it's not good. So, it's always, that's why, in Michigan and other parts of the North, the trees are cut down during the winter when everybody's not around.
Right.
Because they never know you cut the tree down unless they watch you cut the tree down.
Right.
I would say right now I can cut down 10 trees and you can have 100 people play, and if they've been sodded over, you will not have one person say a word. They'll go,
Right,
I don't even remember there was a tree there.
right.
If they watch you cut it down, you got a problem. So
Yeah, that is a hard one.
I always tell people I've made about every mistake you can make. So
So, like, let's say at Lawrence, they brought you in, Valley Crest and Brightview brought you in, and the course wasn't in great shape, and Adam Thomas took over as the superintendent, and then you came in to help him a little bit. Was there any progression there that you can talk to us about?
well, okay. Yeah, back up a little bit. So that was a great experience for me working with Valley Crest, which transferred to Brightview. It was basically a moonlighting situation. I'm at about the time when I got 3 kids about ready to go into college. And I look around and I said to Michelle, I said, we need some more money. We're going to help these kids get through college, because it was our goal to have our children start the world without a lot of college debt, right? I mean, that's what everybody has the goal for. I bet everybody has that goal, and that's ours. And so it's like, oh, how are we going to do it? And so all of a sudden, Brightview calls out of the blue and says, do you want to do some moonlighting? And I said, what's it involve? Going to golf courses. We'll give you a few. Lawrence was one of them. That's where I met Adam. He's so bright, so enthusiastic. He was easy to work with. I mean, we had to work within the parameters of Brightview, and that was our Valley Crest, and that is what it is. But it was really easy to talk with him about fertilizers and growth regulators and how it was going to change the composition of the grasses. But I'll tell you right now, Leo, I talk about that stuff all the time. It's, are you good enough to implement it? And that was what was good about Adam, was he was good enough to implement it. So every time I would come back, it'd be a little better. It'd be a little better. And he'd ask me, more questions than I'd ask him, which was the good sign,
Nice.
And I know you saw that place improve dramatically over a period of time. And if anybody wanted to give me some credit, I'd say, well, I'd kind of push it off. I really would. I'd give most of the credit to the hardworking people there, because they're the ones that
Nice.
went in every day.
So as we wrap this up, I have to say your mother and father did a good job. Because whenever I call you or email you, you respond. You always help. And like you said, a lot of people helped you when you were in
Right.
your corner, and you pass it along. And I want to say, on behalf of myself and the people you helped over the years, thank you. We all appreciate it.
You're very welcome, Leo.
You
Very
got
well.
a good heart.
I appreciate that. I appreciate all that you do as well.
So if you were going to talk to a young superintendent or an assistant superintendent in their early 20s, what advice would you give them?
Listen. I would tell them to listen. I would tell them to listen to their workers, listen to their members, listen to their peers, because that's really the key to this whole thing. And then after that, to recognize, try to learn when to recognize, to act, but listen before you act, really. And that's really what I would tell them. The second thing I would tell them, which is more agronomic, is try not to overwater. It all starts with trying to, if you can figure out, the braver you can be with watering, the better off you're going to be.
What did your father finally say when you became a success at Michigan State?
Well, my father, he passed away at age 58. So I'd only probably been working at Michigan State for about 5 years, and we hadn't even finished the Silverdome project. It hadn't even really started. He passed away about 5 weeks before my twins were born in February of '93. So he only met one of my children, Rebecca, my oldest. But I know he was pretty proud for sure. And my mother, she died in 2015. So there was a longer period of time there, but it was I was quite certain that he was very proud. He made sure that I knew that.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So on that note, we'll wrap it up, Dr. Trey, and appreciate your time. You know, you're a legend in the business, and we appreciate everything you do for us. Thank you.
You're very welcome. You have a great time there, and I hope to see you soon.
All right, Dr. Trey, have a good day. Bye-bye.